Today's topic is going to be on bioinformatics. So we have today's speaker who did his PhD in biomedical engineering, and he recently transitioned into this current role. Today's session is going to be run by our GPS 10 member, Remy Wu. Remy is a PhD, not candidate yet, but very soon candidate, PhD student in School of Medicine, Department of Biochemistry. And she's also the executive core member of GPS 10's career cohort on data science.
Thank you, Harinder, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Remy, and today is my honor to present our speaker, Dr. Zachary Reitz. Dr. Zachary Reitz is a GPS STEM program alumni. He received his PhD in biomedical engineering at University of California, Irvine. And currently, he's working as bioinformatics scientist at Nanostream Technologies. So today, he's going to discuss questions about his career journey, his current roles and responsibilities at his job, and the specific major of his bioinformatics work, and how and what skills or hard skill and soft skills required to be successful at his current job. As Harinder said, if you have any questions, please post it in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask. So I guess just to start off with the conversation, Zach, would you mind sharing with us quickly about how you got into the role and what the transition period between academia and industry was like for you?
Yeah, sure. So I think when I first decided to go into biomedical engineering for my PhD, I maybe expected more to do something related to microfluidics or something like that. But based on what labs I ended up joining, I ended up doing a lot of cellular work, like biochemistry work. And from that, I ended up getting interested in epigenetics and various gene expression kind of things. So naturally, I ended up having to do data analysis, right? So I think previously I had worked with R and had mixed experiences with it, but diving into learning all the different tools that I needed to process my data and ending up writing a bunch of custom Python scripts to kind of do some data analysis work. Really, I don't know, I had a lot of fun doing it. And I had a great postdoc in my lab that kind of gave me a lot of direction. So I figured that is a place that I wanted to go. So I took time trying to develop some of those skill sets. And then in my transition, I think I was maybe a little worried at first because I wasn't sure. A lot of the skills I had learned were very much self-taught. I didn't have a lot of computer science classes or background in that. So through the interview process, I was a little worried that people might expect my skill set to be less than what they were looking for. But at least, I don't know, through the interview process, I kind of learned what questions they were going to ask, and a lot of them are really just making sure they didn't seem too worried about, seeing if I have credentials. They seemed more worried about can I answer questions okay, what tools do you use if you want to do certain kind of data analysis? What are your background in statistics like? And so I grew a lot more confident over kind of the interview process, talking to various companies, and then ended up landing the current position that I have at Nanostream, which is I'm having a lot of fun with it, doing a lot of data science work. So.
Thank you for sharing that. Just kind of follow up on one of the small thing that you mentioned. Do you know what? Do you have an idea of what part of your resume that you think really helped draw the hiring manager or the team that want to hire? Which part of the resume do you think they care about the most for someone applying for a bioinformatics job?
That's a good question. I'm not quite sure which part of my resume might have resonated the most with kind of hiring managers. I spent a lot of time kind of going through the process with Harinder of putting together a resume for one job, and then I ended up switching it up a lot for applying to specifically bioinformatics jobs. Um, I think within my resume, people still wanted a skill section just so that they could like check off different boxes, I believe. But I think maybe having that, like, I forget what it is, but the like personal statement or like quick like line at the top, like describing like, I don't know, basically giving confidence in my own skill set and like what I could do as a bioinformatics scientist or computational biologist. And then kind of in the description section of my actual like experience, kind of putting very like specific achievements, maybe tying like a numeric to those achievements, something like that, I think may have been helpful.
So I remember working with you on Zach. Your resume was really cool because the top part you mentioned, the summary of skills, like you had 3 bullet points, which were really exactly to the point of what the job description was asking for. It's more like leadership, team manager, program, organization skills, and leadership and communication. And another great thing which popped up in your resume was use a STAR approach: situation, task, action, result, with dollar amounts and numbers and percentages. And that's one of the things you can really, one of the strong points you can add into your resume, which the automatic application software will pick up, because there's no one human being looking at your resume. It's, they put it into this machine and it scans it in like less than 5 seconds and pick your resume based on that. So yeah, that was awesome thing about your resume.
I would still say you probably want to tie it to some sort of specific project or goal that you have, even if it's not necessarily something related or necessary for you to finish up. I think having like a particular project in mind and like an end goal that you want to get to, um, really kind of forces you through the process of learning all the different tools you might need to actually achieve that. You'll do a lot of Googling and self-teaching in that process. If you don't like necessarily know maybe some of the basics, obviously, like make sure you get comfortable with Linux and things like using different Python tools. One of my favorites is Spider. I don't really like using kind of the notebook style stuff, but Spider as an IDE I think is really great for learning and then checking in like your different data frames or variables to see like if you messed up in processing it. I think that's super helpful.
Just a follow-up question, Zach. Do you have any kind of like resources for people who are either like newer to computation or data analysis, to kind of beef up their skills on? And also the second question is, do you use do you publish anything on GitHub or any kind of your project on GitHub? And do you think it helps for landing a job in bioinformatics field?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, a lot of it from what I learned was just maybe Googling specific questions. There's 2 resources that I definitely looked at from time to time. I think I like checked out the Towards Data Science blog, which was somewhat helpful. And then also for doing a lot of data visualizations and things like that, I often reference, what was it, the Python plot gallery, I think. I think there's also like an R graph gallery or something like that. And those were both helpful. Sorry, what was the second part of your question? You said
It was about like
GitHub,
GitHub,
right?
whether
Yeah.
it's used, yeah, helpful.
Um, I actually did not have a like public GitHub setup, so none of the scripts or projects that I've been posting were made publicly available. So at least for me, that wasn't really a barrier to entry. A lot of times, I think for some of these positions, they might give you like a specific task that they want you to write a script for and like do your own analysis for, and then send your code back to them. So they'll most companies I think will have like some sort of like technical tests in that process. But yeah, at least for me, it didn't make too much of a difference. I mean, I think my transition into it was maybe a little more slow. Like I was still doing a lot of molecular biology. It was just, before I did an experiment, I might want to, before I did invested a lot of time in particular experiments, which my experiments took a lot of time. I'd want to like look at existing data sets and see if I can kind of get somewhat of an answer before I actually dove in. So that's kind of how I first started doing these sort of analyses. And over time, I realized that I could just find new information from existing data sets. And so I ended up spending a lot of time just asking questions, and those became more complex over time, and I ended up learning a lot of new skills. Um, and I think it was relatively easy, at least because I think from a bioinformatics perspective, I'm still answering very, very biological questions. And so I'm just learning new tools to do that. So I think I don't know, at least for me, it was the transition made sense.
Mm. Sloan has a question for you. Do you think Python is the best coding language to know in terms of getting a bioinformatics job, or do you think R is equivalent?
I think for a bioinformatics job, you can probably get away with knowing one or either. I would at least know maybe a little bit about each. I definitely was far more proficient in Python before getting this job, but I know at least right now I'm working on some software that's going to be open source, and it's specifically meant for the bioinformatics community. And I know a big part of the bioinformatics community, even people that aren't really like well-versed bioinformaticians, will use R. So I've been coding a lot in R recently, but I think, I don't know, a lot of companies that I talked to weren't necessarily super concerned about one or the other, as long as you can perform the kind of analytical tasks you need to get done using whatever tools you have. Um, and usually, if they want one or the other, I found that it's usually in the job description, so you can kind of get a sense of that. Basically, how you would do maybe like a multiple regression or something like that, or figure out, what the influence of a variety of different variables might be. Like how you would analyze like a multifactorial experiment, essentially. Um, I think having a general answer for that was pretty useful. And in terms of maybe more the computational biology, like algorithmic side, generally speaking, they might ask you about like simple more basic and generally known algorithms like KNN or something like that. Um, Most of the time, it wasn't too too in depth. I only had one actual interview where they wanted me to whiteboard out like pseudocode and things like that. Most of the time, they would just send me um, like yeah, like I mentioned earlier, like a specific analysis where they give me like a data set and a question to answer. So
So we have 4 questions in the chat. Can you introduce your daily work routine? Is your current project very close to what you did in the PhD program in terms of methodology and tools? And also, can you mention like what timeline you get for like completing a project in industry compared to like academia?
yeah, so my daily work it varies a lot, and I don't know if that's specific to my position because um, I still do maybe like a lot of background research in biology for some of my projects, and in other projects that I have, like I'll do a lot more work towards developing or implementing certain algorithms or statistical methods. So I don't know, I have a wide variety of tasks that I do. As far as timelines go, um, at least for me, it really depends. Some projects I'm on, there might be specific deadlines for. Others, they're looser. It depends on like what the timelines and priorities are for the company. So I might get the chance to do some more exploratory work in my position, which won't have a particular timeline. I just get to like test things out and then maybe like chat with my manager about what results I'm getting, like how I can improve. Um, Others, though, especially if I'm doing like some work with a specific team, we might have like set deadlines, but at least in my company, they never seem too pressured. Like I have a very good work-life balance as I have it right now. So
Nick asked, could you give a brief overview of the major subdivision of bioinformatics, and do they differ a lot from one another?
yeah, so I would say there's probably I don't know. I don't know like how many subdivisions I would put them in, but I would say there's probably like a computational biology aspect where you're talking about like machine learning and all the algorithms that go with that. Then you're gonna have probably more statistical based kind of work that you might also do, which kind of ends up being separate. I work with a lot of biostatisticians, so I end up doing a lot of work, like talking to them about their processes and whatnot. And then I would say the other part of bioinformatics definitely has a lot to do with uh, working with databases. So being able to, know what databases are out there and know how to like retrieve and process different information and even maybe like create your own. Um,
I was wondering what type of mentorship that you received once you went into industry, and whether it's the norm that a lot of higher ups in the data science field will actually directly mentor the entry level positions, or will they, or less just like assign you guys projects and you guys learn, via trial.
yeah, I think mentorship before I entered like my actual current position, I basically had a postdoc in my lab that kind of if I had questions I could go to and he was happy to answer. At least right now, my direct manager is super helpful. If I ever run into any issues, she's like happy to talk through it with me or like discuss things. And there's other people in my company, and I work with like biostats groups a lot. That if I'm having trouble working through something, like they'll gladly help me. So that hasn't been too much of a problem if I actually need to reach out to someone. Like um, at least in my company, they're there to help.
And do you guys often find yourself talking or collaborating or even exchanging information and like tool sets with other data scientists, like just in the industry in general, or maybe academics?
I've kind of maybe shared some of my analysis with some academics that my company will partner with. Right now, I am working on open source software that should be shared more broadly with like the bioinformatics community. So we'll see how that goes, but I haven't quite experienced that yet, at least outside of my company.
Okay, great, thanks.
Karen asked, did you have any industry internship experiences during your PhD?
I did not. So I never did any industry related work with bioinformatics in my PhD. I had like some short industry experience doing like software validation prior to my PhD, but um, not really directly related to actual bioinformatics work.
What's your career path look like?
I think that's a wonderful question. It gets asked many times. It's anyways difficult to transition into industry, but then what after that? People do feel that, okay, I wanted to get into this, but then I don't see growth there. A lot of times that happens. So it's a great question. How many avenues of professional development and climbing up the ladder are there for you in your current role?
Yeah, I think my company is currently growing a lot right now, so I think that there might be some opportunity for like me to get into a managerial position at some point within the next couple of years. Um, but my guess is it really depends on the company and depending if they're in like a growth phase or not, and what opportunities they're willing to give you. I think at least my manager like seems to take professional development like fairly seriously. So she's like will assign me like team projects that I get to be lead on and direct and things like that. Um, so far it's been working out. We'll see where that goes in the future. goal is probably to get to some sort of managerial position, just because I kind of like enjoy working collaboratively, but I'm still new in my career, so we'll see.
I have one quick question about, would you mind like giving a little bit more detail about nanostring? What does it do, and where did they fit into the whole field of bioinformatics?
Yeah, so nanostring, I think for a long time is basically they have two main focuses right now. They're basically a gene expression company, but their first technology was basically looking at doing panels of gene expression, so looking at gene expression for around 700 genes. Um, so not really like groundbreaking, but it can be useful in a variety of circumstances, especially in medical trials and things like that. But I think what's been really interesting and what I've had a lot of fun working on is they have a lot of spatial genomics technologies now, which basically will look at gene expression on the single cell level or multicellular level across tissue samples. So that's been really fun, kind of developing tools to do analysis of that data, since I think it's very unique and new. So
Yeah, I think spatial genomics stuff is really cool. I was trying to get in on it for one of my experiments, but it unfortunately didn't work out for my tissue type. But I would love to get into that stuff later. Um, so Sloan asked if do you miss the wet lab aspect of science?
personally, I don't. It wasn't so much that like I hated the wet lab. It's just I think there's at least from my experience, there was a lot of variability that I couldn't necessarily control, and in bioinformatics, most everything is under my control. So it definitely feels at least easier for me. If something goes wrong, I can figure out how to fix it, rather than be confused and lost for like a couple months trying to track down a problem. I would say if you're going into a smaller company, they might have expectation that you do like a broader variety of work. I think larger companies seem to maybe put you down like have very specific tasks or kinds of projects that they want you to work on. At least for me, I think NanoString's like a mid-sized company, but my specific role, I get to be really varied. So I think I kind of lucked out. I got the best of both worlds there.
Um,
What was the open platform used for, or what are you planning on using it for?
Sorry, what was that?
The open software,
Oh
guess
yeah.
program, or yeah.
Yeah, well, because my company is doing a lot of work in spatial genomics, their goal is to provide some basic tools that the bioinformatics community can like kind of use as a launch pad to analyze the data. So that's essentially what it's for, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Okay, so it's just basically like programming tool sets that they can use to quickly process data.
Yeah, exactly.
From their genomes. Okay.
Yeah, it's meant to complement kind of the products that we have.
Just a quick question, because you mentioned you work with database earlier. Do you use SQL at all in your line of work?
I do. I don't actually know SQL all too well, but I think doing like queries in Python really hasn't been too complicated. A lot of the databases, the SQL databases, my manager has already set up, so I haven't had to do too much of that. Although I think there are some projects in the future that I'll have to kind of set up different SQL databases for. So
Thank you. Josh asked, how important are connections, networking when looking for a job in bioinformatics?
I would say as important as any other job. I think networking, especially on LinkedIn, was pretty much how I landed the position that I have. I spent a lot of time trying to track down who might be the hiring manager from each company for the positions I was applying to, and then kind of sending them a message on like LinkedIn. I think especially because I was getting a job at the beginning of the pandemic and everything was locked down, that was a really important way for me to connect with people. And I ended up actually directing messaging my hiring manager that I work with now. So that's how I got my job.
Do you think, I guess because no one's asking question, do you think that the job prospect for this career post-COVID, like, do you see a lot of hiring, or is there like a pause in hiring for this kind of career post-COVID?
I mean, I would say that, I don't think that the medical science or biological science community has really stopped hiring right now. I think there may have been like a slight freeze early in the pandemic. I know my company had like a short hiring freeze immediately after I joined, but right now, at least for my company, they're hiring like a fair number of positions, and I think that's probably true for others.